Jeremy Bailey. I live in Long Lake Road, Pasco.
Last name, please.
Bailey with a B, B-A-I-L-E-Y. Since we're throwing out credentials tonight, I have a master's degree in engineering. The years that I used to work, I started out working for Department of Defense contractors, and I've worked on some billion-dollar proposals that we've essentially sold to the military, primarily the Army. What I can tell you is every proposal we've ever worked on, as a young engineer, I was naive, I didn't realize why this was happening. I would always wonder why, look at that, frequencies. I always wondered why the proposals were always rosy colored and, quite frankly, a stretch of the reality of what we could meet. And I realized the point of that was to then sell our products to the customer, in this case, being the military. Once we sold them this product, they brought it to our attention that for one reason or another, the specs were not met. We always seemed surprised, apologetic, and we worked to fix those problems and to make those products work within the specs that we sold them to. Sometimes we could, sometimes we couldn't. But now the product was already sold to the customer, and anyone who's ever worked with the military knows that they have to go through great lengths to approve certain products. So they would spend a great deal of time, money, and effort to work with us to make these products meet their specifications. And then when we couldn't, we would have to go apply for something called an exception, and we'd have to get an exception. So they would have to use our products that mostly meet the specs. Okay, this sounds very familiar to what I'm hearing here, and Invenergy is basically already admitting that, they're going to break our noise ordinances, whether or not we give them a variance, which I strongly oppose in case I run out of time. They've already admitted that in their data request, as Mrs. Sherman just spoke about up there. They already said, well, you have a noise ordinance that you can enforce. So, and as we all know how well that noise ordinance works in regards to enforcing Spectra and their compliance. All right, that's enough about that. Let's talk about vibrations and noise. So to be clear, and I know you guys know this, but I want to make it clear that the rest of us realize this. There's a difference between the A-weighted noise frequencies and the different frequency bands. And from my understanding, I was a little late tonight, that they claim they're going to meet the A-weighted, however, they're seeking a variance on some of the lower frequencies. Is that correct? Anybody?
On the octave, yes.
On the octave bands. Okay, so I know it's my understanding that some gentlemen were thrown out tonight for trying to demonstrate this. Well, I also, when I was an intern, I worked for another Department of Defense contractor that works on submarines. And submarines their level of communication uses very, very low frequencies, because low frequencies are very hard to mitigate, almost impossible, and they travel for very long distances, which is why people that live a mile, 2 miles, 3 miles away can hear the hum constantly from the Spectra Energy Station. I'm not sure how you type that in, but that's pretty cool if you did. And now they're asking for an exception on these low frequency bands that we can't hear, although our brains do hear vibrations and they interpret that into sounds. So we essentially do hear them. The vibrations also affect our houses. I live probably 3/4 of a mile away from Spectra now. The proposed power plant would be even closer than that. I can tell you on a daily basis, my house shakes. You can just hear the and as the Department of Health pointed out in a recent article that they submitted, various people have different threshold levels of tolerance for noises and frequencies. Myself, it appears that living with my wife, that my tolerance is much higher than hers, because for years she's been telling me how much the compressor station, before it became so loud over the last couple of years while they've expanded, how it was driving her nuts. And I said, yeah, I can hear it, doesn't really bother me too much. And then the Department of Health article, reinforced that. So even if you guys were to do a site visit, it's possible for you to go up there and look and be like, yeah, I can hear it, but that doesn't bother me. Well, I can tell you, one, you haven't lived with it 24/7, over and over and over, day after day after day after day after day after day. Sorry about that. So it is subjective, and some people are. It drives. My wife has a master's degree. Since we're throwing out, credentials, that seems to be the thing to do tonight. She has a master's degree in nursing. She practices anesthesia, and she basically explained to me everything that the Department of Health, and we've listened to Irene Watson talk about it many times before. So when it comes to giving a variance for the noise, I want you to take a serious look, and this is a very serious thing. I want you to say no, because we don't want those low frequencies. We're already trying to deal with the problem we have there today. And I want to make sure that the language you use is strong. And I'm going to wrap it up by a quick example. We appreciate a letter that our town recently wrote to FERC in regards to Spectra Energy. And in one of the instances they put, in one of the paragraphs, they put, Burrillville residents who live in the vicinity of the compressor station have expressed concerns about the noise and vibration. Now, if I'm some entity that is not familiar with Burrillville, when I read that, I think to myself, it affects a couple of residents, that's not really a big deal. I want you to use very strong language, because I believe all of you are being our neighbors and being reasonable, and to properly do your job, you are going to basically advise against any of these variances, but I'd like you to use very strong language while you advise against them. For example, the paragraph that I just read, you could rewrite it in another way. For example, the lives of thousands of residents have been severely negatively affected by the excessive noise and vibrations. Their right to quiet and peaceful enjoyment has been stripped away from them by the blatant disregard for Burrillville's noise ordinance. So you can see how, when you read it that way, to me, if I wasn't familiar with the situation, I'm like, wow, this is a serious situation. We really need to look at this. So I urge you that, I already know that you guys are going to come out in opposition of giving these variances, because it's just the right thing to do. It just makes sense. But I want to make sure that your language is strong enough, because your advisory opinion does matter, as Mr. Woods spoke about earlier. It does matter, so please do so in your opinion. Thank you.
Thank you for your suggestion.